The morning sun poured softly through the curtains of a small house on the corner of Maple Street. It was a normal-looking house. Pale yellow walls, an old oak tree in the front yard, and a worn-out basketball lying near the porch steps. To anyone passing by, it looked like the kind of home where laughter might live. But inside, things were not always as peaceful as they seemed. A little boy no older than 8 sat quietly at the kitchen table, pushing a spoon around his bowl of cereal. The milk had gone warm. His mother, sitting across from him, stared blankly out the window, lost in her thoughts. Her name was Lena. She used to be full of life, the kind of woman who sang while she cooked and always had a story to tell. But lately her smile had faded, replaced by a quiet tiredness that no one seemed to notice. The boy, small and thoughtful, watched her carefully. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but something inside told him not to. He'd learned that sometimes asking too many questions made the air in the room feel heavy. So he stayed silent, pretending to eat, while the clock on the wall ticked softly. Every morning followed the same routine. Lena would pack his lunch, help him with his school shoes, and walk him halfway down the street. She'd wave, give a small smile, and say, "Be good today." But even when she smiled, her eyes looked tired, like she hadn't slept properly in a long time. The boy didn't understand everything happening around him, but he could feel it. Children are good at that. They can sense when something is wrong, even when no one says a word. He noticed how quiet his home had become. The TV was rarely on anymore, and dinners were short and silent. When Lena's husband, the boy's stepfather, came home from work, the atmosphere in the house seemed to change. His footsteps always made the boy's stomach tighten a little. It wasn't because of loud shouting or broken things. It was the way the man's voice carried a certain edge, sharp and unpredictable. One wrong word could turn an ordinary evening into one filled with tension. The boy loved his mother deeply. She was his whole world. He could tell she tried her best to make everything seem normal. She cooked his favorite meals and still tucked him in at night. But there were times when she'd sit on the edge of his bed long after he had closed his eyes. She thought he was asleep, but he could feel her presence sitting quietly, lost in her thoughts. At school, the boy was quiet but kind. His teacher often said he was a thoughtful child, always willing to help others. He liked drawing and would sometimes sketch little houses, trees, and people holding hands. His friends didn't know much about his home life, and he preferred it that way. He didn't like to talk about the things that made him sad. One day after class, his teacher knelt beside his desk and said gently, "You seem a little quiet lately. Is everything okay at home?" The boy forced a small smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "Everything's fine." He meant it. Or maybe he wanted it to be true. That afternoon, he walked home slower than usual. He stopped by the park, dragging his shoes through the sand and watching the other kids play tag. He wanted to join them, but his mind felt heavy. By the time he reached his street, the sun was starting to set. From a distance, he saw his mother sitting alone on the porch steps, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when she saw him and smiled, though her eyes looked red like she had been crying. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "How was school?" "Okay," he replied, setting his backpack down. "I drew something today." "Oh yeah?" she asked, trying to sound cheerful. He opened his notebook and showed her a drawing of 3 people standing in front of a house. A woman, a man, and a little boy. Above them, he had drawn a bright yellow sun. "It's us," he said proudly. "I made the sun extra big because you like sunny days." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want him to see her cry. "It's beautiful," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "You're such a good boy." Moments like these kept her going. Small, tender moments that reminded her what love really felt like. But deep inside, she knew something had to change. Life couldn't stay this way forever. That night, as the boy lay in bed, he listened to the sounds of the house, the creaking floorboards, the distant hum of a passing car, and the soft wind brushing against the window. He could hear his mother moving quietly in the kitchen, cleaning up long after dinner. Then the familiar sound of the front door opening. His stepfather was home. The boy closed his eyes and pulled the blanket over his head. He didn't want to hear anything else. He wanted to dream of a world where his mother laughed again, where their home felt warm instead of heavy. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Lena made pancakes, humming a soft tune under her breath. The boy smiled, glad to see her in a lighter mood. He told her about a story his teacher read in class about a lion who found his courage. She laughed and said, "Maybe that lion lives inside you too." The boy grinned. "You think so?" "I know so," she said, tapping his nose gently. Days turned into weeks, and the boy began to notice little things. How his mother talked less, how she jumped a little when the phone rang, how she always checked the clock before doing anything. Still, she tried to hide her worry behind smiles and routines. On Sundays, they went to church. The boy liked sitting next to his mother, listening to the soft music and the pastor's kind voice. People often said, "You two look just alike," and she'd smile proudly. But once they got home, that lightness seemed to fade again. One evening, while Lena was folding laundry, the boy sat beside her and asked quietly, "Mom, are you happy?" She froze for a moment, then forced a small laugh. "Of course, honey. Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "You don't laugh as much anymore." She looked at him for a long time, unsure what to say. Then she reached over, brushed his hair aside, and said softly, "Some days are harder than others. But you know what keeps me strong?" "What?" "You," she said, smiling gently. "You remind me that there's still good in this world." The boy didn't fully understand what she meant, but he hugged her tightly. He didn't know that his words, his quiet love, were the very thing keeping her from giving up. As the seasons changed, so did the energy in the house. The air grew heavier, though no one ever said why. The boy started spending more time in his room, building little towers with his blocks and drawing pictures that made him feel safe. Sometimes, when he heard voices rising from the other room, he'd close his eyes and imagine being somewhere else, a place where everyone spoke kindly and laughter filled the air. He learned to recognize his mother's moods, the way her shoulders tensed when she was nervous, or how she'd hum to herself when she tried to stay calm. He wished he could do something, anything, to make her happy again. But he was just a child, and children often carry silent hopes that no one else can see. One night, while Lena thought he was asleep, she stood by his bed and whispered a small prayer. "Please let him have a better life than this. Let him grow up brave and kind." She brushed a tear away quickly, kissed his forehead, and walked quietly out of the room. That night, he dreamt of standing in a big field filled with sunlight. His mother was there smiling, free from the shadows that seemed to follow her. When he woke up, the dream stayed with him, bright and warm, like a promise he didn't yet understand. The little boy didn't know it then, but the quiet courage growing inside him would one day change everything. For now, he was just a child trying to understand the world, a world where love and fear somehow lived under the same roof. But even in the quiet, something was shifting. The story of their lives was still being written. And soon, the smallest voice in that quiet house would rise, and nothing would ever be the same again. Days began to move slower in the little yellow house. The boy noticed how his mother tried harder than ever to make everything feel normal. She woke up early, made breakfast, packed his lunch, and smiled whenever he looked her way. But even he could tell her smile didn't always reach her eyes. Each morning the boy would tie his shoes carefully, watching her out of the corner of his eye. She always seemed lost in thought, staring out the kitchen window at the empty street. Sometimes she whispered to herself, though he couldn't hear what she said. He wished he could fix whatever was wrong, but he didn't know how. He was only 8, and the world still felt too big for his small hands to hold. At school, he kept quiet, drawing pictures during art class and helping his teacher clean up the tables afterward. His teacher often said, "You have such a gentle heart." He would just smile shyly and nod. But inside, he carried worries that no one else knew about. One afternoon after school, he stayed longer on the playground. The other kids were laughing and running around, but he just sat on the swings, pushing himself gently back and forth. His best friend ran up to him and asked, "Aren't you coming to play tag?" He shook his head. "I'm tired." His friend shrugged and ran off, leaving him to watch the sun slowly dip behind the trees. He liked being outside. The park felt safe, wide open, full of air that didn't carry heavy silence. He didn't have to worry about saying the wrong thing or doing something that would make his mother nervous. When he finally walked home, the streetlights had begun to glow. From the corner, he could see the porch light already on, casting a soft yellow circle on the steps. His mother was sitting there waiting, her hands folded tightly. When she saw him, she stood quickly. "You scared me," she said gently. It's getting dark. You shouldn't walk home so late. I'm sorry, he said, looking down. I was just at the park. She sighed, then pulled him into a hug. It's okay. Just tell me next time, all right? He nodded. Her arms felt warm, but he could feel how tired she was, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Inside, dinner was already set on the table. They sat together quietly, eating in soft clinks of spoons and forks. She tried to ask about his day, but he could tell her mind was somewhere else. She checked the clock several times, then quickly cleared the plates when they were done. The boy went to his room and sat by the window, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. He heard faint voices from the other room. Nothing loud, just words spoken too quickly, too sharply. He tried not to listen. Instead, he focused on the stars beginning to appear outside. They looked calm and steady, like they didn't worry about anything. A few days later, something small but important happened. His teacher called home. She had noticed the boy seemed distracted and quieter than usual. When his mother answered the call, her heart tightened. She assured the teacher that everything was fine, that her son was just a little tired lately. After the call, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at her phone. She knew she was trying too hard to hold everything together, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending. That weekend, she decided to take her son to the park. It had been a long time since they'd done something just the two of them. The weather was cool, with a soft breeze that carried the smell of freshly cut grass. They walked hand in hand along the path, stopping to watch ducks glide across the pond. The boy threw small pieces of bread into the water and laughed as the ducks hurried to grab them. His mother smiled, really smiled, for the first time in a while. You like feeding them, don't you? She asked. He nodded. They don't fight. They just take turns. Her heart ached at the innocence in his words. That's true, she said softly. The world could learn something from them. They sat on a bench and shared ice cream. For a few minutes, it felt like everything was okay again. No worries, no fear, just the two of them and the simple joy of being together. When they got home that evening, the house felt lighter. The boy drew another picture, this time of the park, the ducks, and the sun shining bright. He gave it to his mother, who hung it on the fridge. It's beautiful, she said. Now our kitchen has a little sunshine. But peace in that house never stayed long. The next few weeks were quiet but tense. The boy noticed how his mother avoided phone calls and seemed to choose her words carefully. Some nights, she'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at papers or bills, rubbing her temples. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but was afraid of the answer. So he did little things, cleaned up his toys without being asked, helped her fold laundry, and told her stories about school to make her smile. She always thanked him, telling him what a sweet child he was. One evening, while he was drawing in his room, he overheard his mother talking on the phone. Her voice was soft but shaky. I just don't know what to do anymore, she said. I'm trying to keep things together for him. The boy didn't know who she was talking to, but her words stayed in his heart. He began to understand that his mother was scared, though she never said so. He wanted to be brave for her, to somehow make things better, even if he didn't know how. Then something changed, a small but powerful shift that started the journey neither of them expected. One night, there was a knock at the door. It was gentle, but it startled his mother. She opened it to find a woman standing there, wearing a kind smile and holding a folder. She said she was from the community center, offering family support visits for parents and children. His mother hesitated, then invited her in. The woman spoke softly, asking how things were at home and if Lena needed any help. His mother tried to act calm, saying they were doing fine, but the woman's gentle eyes seemed to see through her. Before leaving, she gave his mother a card. If you ever need to talk, she said, you can call me anytime. You're not alone. After the door closed, his mother sat on the couch holding the card for a long time. The boy came over and sat beside her. Who was that? He asked. Someone who wants to help families. she replied quietly. Are we a family that needs help? She looked at him with tired eyes but smiled faintly. Maybe a little, she admitted. But that's okay. Everyone needs help sometimes. For the first time, the boy saw something different in her expression. Not fear, but a small spark of hope. The next few days passed slowly, but something inside the house began to shift. His mother seemed more thoughtful, less afraid to look people in the eye when they spoke to her. She began to write things down in a small notebook and spent more time talking softly on the phone. The boy didn't know the details, but he could sense that change was coming, the kind of change that starts quietly like the first breeze before a storm. One afternoon when he got home from school, he found his mother cleaning the living room. The windows were open, letting in fresh air. Music played softly in the background. It wasn't loud or joyful, but it was there. A small sound of life returning. "Mom," he said, surprised, "you're cleaning everything." She laughed a little. "I guess I am. It feels good to make things fresh again." He smiled. "It smells nice." She turned and looked at him for a long time. "You know," she said softly, "you make me brave. You really do." He didn't understand what she meant then, but years later he would. That night before bed, she tucked him in and kissed his forehead. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "always remember, you are loved, and you are stronger than you think." He nodded sleepily, clutching his blanket. "I love you, Mom." "I love you more," she said, turning off the light. As he drifted to sleep, the house felt strangely calm, like it was holding its breath. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and the moonlight slipped softly across the floor. Something was coming, though neither of them knew it yet. It wouldn't be long before their quiet life changed forever, and the little boy's brave heart would be tested in a way that would touch everyone who heard his story. The morning light came through the thin curtains, washing the small room in soft gold. The boy sat on the edge of his bed, dressed neatly, his shoes tied too tight, his hands resting on his knees. He could hear his mother moving around in the next room, her footsteps quick, her breathing a little unsteady. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. The boy didn't know exactly what was going to happen that day, but he could feel that it was important. His mother had told him they were going somewhere official, and that he needed to be on his best behavior. When she appeared at the door, she looked calm but tired. Her eyes had that same soft sadness they always carried, but now there was something else in them too, a quiet determination. She smiled at him and said, "You ready, sweetheart?" He nodded. "Yes." They left the house together, walking hand in hand down the small front path. The morning air was cool, and a few leaves crunched beneath their feet. A car was waiting for them by the curb, an older gray sedan with a woman from the community center sitting behind the wheel. She greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said gently. "Are you both ready?" The boy looked up at his mother, who gave a small nod. "We're ready," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. The drive was long and quiet. The boy looked out the window, watching the town pass by. Rows of houses, a small park, the bakery where he and his mother used to buy muffins on weekends. Everything looked normal, yet the world felt different. He didn't fully understand where they were going or why, but he could tell from the way the adults spoke in low voices that it was something serious. He felt a strange mix of fear and bravery in his small chest, like standing on the edge of something big without knowing what waited on the other side. When they arrived, the car stopped in front of a tall brick building with wide steps and a flag waving gently above the entrance. The woman turned to the boy and smiled kindly. "You're going to do great today," she said. "Just be honest and speak from your heart." He nodded slowly. His heart beat faster, though he didn't really know what great meant in this situation. Inside, the building smelled faintly of paper and coffee. People walked quickly through the halls, carrying folders and wearing serious faces. The boy held his mother's hand tightly, his small fingers gripping hers as they followed the woman to a quiet waiting area. They sat on a bench. The boy's legs swung nervously. His mother smoothed his hair and whispered, "Everything will be okay. Just remember, you're safe. You can tell the truth." He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Will you be there with me?" She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "I'll be close. I promise." After a few minutes, a man in a dark suit appeared. His face was kind, and he knelt down to the boy's level. "Hi there," he said. "My name is Mr. Harris. I'm going to help you today. You don't need to be scared, okay?" The boy nodded, though his throat felt tight. "Okay." The man smiled. "That's good. You're very brave." He glanced at the boy's mother, then back at him. "We just want to hear what you remember. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. Just be honest, that's all." After a few moments, they were called into a room. It wasn't large or fancy, but it felt serious. There were a few people sitting quietly at tables, and in the center was a man in a robe who looked important. The boy could sense that everyone was waiting for something important to happen. When he sat down, his hands trembled slightly. Someone offered him a small glass of water. He took a sip and tried to steady his breathing. The judge spoke gently, asking him if he understood why he was there. The boy nodded. He didn't know all the big words, but he knew this moment mattered. He was there to tell the truth, to speak about things that had made his home a sad and heavy place. He looked toward his mother. She sat a few rows behind him, her eyes filled with love and worry. She smiled at him, trying to give him courage. The boy turned back and took a small breath. The room was so quiet that he could hear his own heartbeat. Someone asked him softly, "Can you tell us what you remember?" For a moment, he didn't know where to start. But then, in the quietest voice, he began to speak. He talked about the nights when his mother seemed afraid, about how the house would go still and silent. He spoke about how he used to hide in his room and pretend to be asleep, hoping the morning would come quickly. He didn't use big or scary words, just honest ones, the kind that came from a child's heart. He said he loved his mother very much and that he wished their home could be happy again. When he finished, he looked up. The room was silent. The adults looked moved, some wiping their eyes, others staring at the little boy as though they were seeing courage in its purest form. The judge leaned forward and said softly, "You did a very good job. Thank you for being so honest." The boy nodded. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt lighter, as if a heavy secret had finally been lifted off his small shoulders. After it was over, his mother rushed to him, hugging him tightly. "You were so brave," she whispered into his hair. So brave." The woman from the community center smiled, her eyes glistening. "He did wonderfully," she said. He spoke with such honesty. The boy didn't fully understand how powerful his words had been, but he could tell from the way the adults spoke that something important had changed. They left the building quietly. Outside, the sun was shining, and a soft wind moved through the trees. The boy tilted his face upward, feeling the warmth on his cheeks. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel so heavy. As they walked back to the car, his mother squeezed his hand. "You made me so proud today," she said. He looked up at her. "Did I do good?" "You did more than good," she said, smiling through tears. "You told the truth, and that changes everything." The drive home was peaceful. The radio played softly, and for once neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. The boy looked out the window at the passing trees, thinking about what had happened. He didn't know it yet, but his words, simple, honest, from the heart, had begun a chain of change that would shape their future forever. When they reached home, the little yellow house looked different somehow. It wasn't that the walls had changed or the rooms had grown brighter. It was something inside them. A new sense of peace, fragile but real, seemed to fill the space. That evening, his mother made soup, humming quietly as she stirred the pot. The boy sat at the table, drawing another picture, this one of a bright courtroom with a smiling judge and sunshine pouring through the windows. When he showed it to her, she laughed softly and said, "That's beautiful." He pointed at the small figure he'd drawn in the middle. "That's me." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Yes, that's you." "My brave little one." They ate together, talking softly about ordinary things, school, his favorite stories, the ducks at the park. It was the most peaceful dinner they'd had in months. Later that night, when the boy lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened. He remembered the room, the faces, the way everyone had listened to him. He realized that even though he was small, his voice had mattered. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. The kind that comes from knowing the truth has been spoken, and that somehow everything would be all right. In another room, his mother sat quietly by the window, watching the moon. She thought about how far they'd come and about fear, silence, and now, courage. She knew there was still a long road ahead. But tonight, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The truth had finally been spoken, not by adults in suits or officials with files, but by a small child whose heart refused to stay silent. That truth would ripple far beyond the walls of that little yellow house. It would change lives, mend wounds, and remind everyone who heard it that even the quietest voice can hold the power to heal. And though he didn't know it yet, the boy's brave words that day had already begun to shape a new chapter for both of them. One built not on fear, but on freedom, love, and the unshakable strength of truth. The days after the courtroom visit felt strange, almost unreal. The house was quieter than usual, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not heavy or frightening anymore, just empty. Like a storm had passed and left everything still. The boy noticed the change right away. His mother moved through the house more slowly now, as if she was learning how to breathe again. She cleaned every room, opened the windows, and let sunlight pour in. For the first time in a long while, the curtains were not drawn shut. He watched her as she hummed softly while washing the dishes. Her voice was a little shaky, but it was music to his ears. He hadn't heard her hum like that in months. One morning she sat with him at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. "You were very brave," she said quietly. "I hope you know that." He shrugged a little, not really sure what to say. "I just told the truth," she smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." He looked down at his cereal and stirred it with his spoon. "Are we okay now?" he asked. Her eyes softened. "We're getting there," she said. "It might take some time, but yes, I think we're going to be okay." The boy wanted to believe her. He didn't completely understand everything that had happened, but he could feel that something big had changed. The air inside their home felt lighter now, and his mother's smile, though small, was real again. In the weeks that followed, new routines began to take shape. His mother started attending meetings at the community center. Sometimes she would take him along, letting him play in the children's room while she sat with other adults. He didn't know what they talked about, but when she came out, she always looked calmer, like she had found a little more strength each time. At home, she began cooking more often. The smell of warm bread and soup filled the kitchen again. She even started singing while she cooked, soft songs from her childhood. The boy would sit at the table and draw while she moved around the room, her energy slowly returning. One evening, she surprised him with something special. "How would you like to visit Grandma this weekend?" she asked, smiling. His face lit up instantly. "Really?" She nodded. "Really. It's been a while. I think it's time we saw her again." The drive to Grandma's house felt like a small adventure. The countryside stretched out before them. Wide fields, tall trees, and birds flying across the open sky. The boy pressed his face against the window, watching the scenery pass. When they arrived, his grandmother rushed out to meet them, wrapping them both in her arms. "Oh, I've missed you so much," she said, tears shining in her eyes. The boy felt warmth flood through him. It had been months since he'd seen her, and her house always smelled of cinnamon and soap. Everything there felt peaceful, the way the sunlight touched the old wooden floor, the sound of the wind chimes outside the window, the calm rhythm of her voice as she talked. That weekend was full of small joys. They baked cookies together, watched an old movie, and sat on the porch watching the sunset. His grandmother told stories about when his mother was a little girl, and he laughed at the funny parts. On Sunday evening, before they left, his grandmother took his mother aside. The boy couldn't hear what they said, but when his mother came back, her eyes looked softer and she smiled in a way that made him feel safe again. When they returned home, life slowly began to rebuild itself. The boy went back to school, and his teacher noticed the difference in him right away. He smiled more, spoke up in class, and even volunteered to read aloud. His drawings became brighter too. More sunshine, more color, more laughter in the faces he sketched. One afternoon, his teacher stopped him after class. "You seem happier these days," she said kindly. "Is everything better at home?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My mom's happy again." She smiled warmly. "That's wonderful to hear. You're a strong little boy, you know that?" He blushed and said, "I just want her to smile." At home, his mother began to talk more openly with him. She told him about her meetings at the center, how she was learning to build a new life, how to stand on her own 2 feet. She had even started helping other women who were trying to find their strength again. One night as they ate dinner, she said, "You know, there are people out there who feel scared just like we used to. I want to help them. Maybe I can make a difference." The boy looked up at her with admiration. "You already make a difference," he said. "You help me every day." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were happy ones. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You help me too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." As months passed, the little yellow house became a place of healing. New memories replaced old ones. Quiet breakfasts full of laughter, warm evenings spent reading stories, and sunny weekends at the park. The boy loved their trips to the park the most. They would feed the ducks again, just like before, and sit on the same bench. His mother looked peaceful now, her eyes bright as she watched the world around her. One afternoon, while they sat there, she said softly, "Do you remember what you told the judge?" He thought for a moment. "That I wanted you to stop being scared?" She nodded. "That's right. Those words changed everything. You were so brave that day." He looked down shyly, kicking at the dirt with his shoe. "I was scared too." She smiled gently. "That's what courage is, being scared but still speaking up." The boy didn't say anything, but her words stayed with him. Not long after, something wonderful happened. The community center invited his mother to share her story at an event. She hesitated at first, afraid of standing in front of a crowd, but the people at the center encouraged her. "Your story will help others," they said. On the day of the event, she dressed in her best clothes and took the boy with her. The room was full of people, some sitting quietly, others holding notebooks, all waiting to hear her speak. When she stood at the front, her hands trembled slightly, but then she saw her son sitting in the front row, smiling at her. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was calm, honest, and strong. She talked about fear, about finding courage, and about the day her little boy spoke the truth in court. "That moment changed everything," she said. "It taught me that no matter how small a voice may seem, it can hold the power to set you free." By the time she finished, the whole room was quiet. Then people began to clap, softly at first, then louder. The boy's eyes shone with pride. His mother smiled at him through tears, and he knew she was thinking about how far they had come. After the event, several women came up to thank her. One of them said, "Your story gave me hope." Another said, "I want to be brave too." On the way home, the boy looked out the car window, thinking about everything that had happened. "Mom," he said softly, "you're helping people now." She smiled. "Maybe we both are." That night, when she tucked him into bed, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'm proud of you." He smiled sleepily. "I'm proud of you too." As the months went by, their lives continued to grow brighter. His mother got a new job at the local library. The boy loved to visit her there after school, sitting quietly at a corner table while she helped people find books. Sometimes she'd bring him a storybook to read, and they'd sit together after closing time, lost in the world of stories. It was their favorite part of the day, quiet, peaceful, safe. The little yellow house became a home again, filled with laughter, warmth, and the simple kind of happiness that comes from love and healing. Every once in a while, the boy would ask, "Do you ever get scared anymore?" His mother would smile and say, "Not like before. I still have hard days, but I'm not afraid to face them now." He would nod, feeling proud that his small voice had helped make that possible. And even though he didn't fully understand it yet, he was beginning to see how truth, kindness, and courage, and even in the smallest form, could change everything. Years passed, but the memory of that courtroom day never left them. It wasn't something they talked about often, yet it lived quietly in their hearts, not as a wound anymore, but as a reminder of how far they had come. The boy was growing fast now. His voice was deeper, his steps longer, his thoughts wider. School was going well, and he had started to dream about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Sometimes he said he wanted to be a lawyer so he could help other families. Other times he thought about becoming a teacher, someone who could make children feel seen and safe. His mother smiled whenever he talked about the future. She would say, "You can be anything as long as you stay kind." Their lives had settled into something simple and beautiful. The mornings were full of quiet laughter, the smell of coffee and the sound of birds outside their window. The boy still liked to sit by the window before school, watching the world wake up. He would sometimes see his mother standing in the garden, watering the small flowers they had planted together. She looked peaceful there, her face calm and full of life. The garden had become her favorite place. It started with just one small plant, a gift from a friend at the community center. But soon she filled the backyard with color: roses, sunflowers, mint leaves, and little pots of herbs on the porch. She said caring for the plants made her feel grounded, like she was growing alongside them. Every evening they would sit outside together, talking about their day. She often told him, "You know, we built this life from the ground up. Every bit of peace we have now, we earned it." He would nod, feeling proud, though he sometimes didn't know what to say. Deep down he understood. They had come through storms most people couldn't imagine, and somehow they had found their way to the light. One sunny afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from the same community center his mother used to attend. They were organizing a small event to celebrate people who had helped make positive changes in their town, and they wanted her to speak again. At first, she hesitated. She looked at the letter for a long time before saying anything. "I don't know," she murmured. "It's been years. Maybe people don't need to hear my story anymore." The boy looked up from his homework and said, "Of course they do. People still need hope." She smiled softly. "You sound like someone much older than you are." He grinned. "That's because I learned from you." That night she sat by the window thinking. The moonlight fell gently on her face. She remembered all the faces she had met at the center, the quiet tears, the whispered fears, and the courage it took for people to start over. By the time she went to bed, her mind was made up. She would go. The day of the event arrived with bright skies. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she had worn years before when she first shared her story. Her son was by her side again, taller now, carrying a camera so he could record the moment. The hall was filled with people. Some she recognized, others she didn't. The same warm energy flowed through the room. When her turn came, she stepped up to the small stage, took a deep breath, and looked at the audience. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. She spoke about change, about healing, about the strength it takes to rebuild a life. And then she told them about her son, how his brave words had once opened a door she thought would never budge. "He was just a child," she said softly. "But in that moment, he became my light." His courage reminded me that truth can be powerful, even when it comes from the smallest voice. As she spoke, the boy felt his chest swell with emotion. He remembered that day in court, the fear, the silence, the way his hands had trembled. But now, sitting there, he realized those moments had shaped who he was becoming. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some people were crying, others smiling. It was more than just applause. It was gratitude. After the event, several people came up to speak with her. One young woman holding a small child said quietly, "I've been scared to leave my situation. Hearing you today gave me courage." His mother took the woman's hands gently and said, "You already have courage. You just have to use it." On the drive home, the boy looked at her and said, "You helped her." She smiled. "Maybe. But sometimes helping just means reminding someone of their own strength." Life moved on in gentle waves after that. Seasons changed, school years passed, and their home continued to grow with life and laughter. The boy made new friends, joined the school newspaper, and even started volunteering at the same community center. He found joy in helping younger kids with homework or just listening when they needed someone to talk to. Sometimes they'd tell him things they were afraid to say to adults, about arguments at home, about feeling scared or small. He never gave advice he didn't mean. Instead, he would say, "You're not alone. Things can get better." The staff at the center noticed his calm way with people. One of them said to him one day, "You've got a real gift for understanding others." He smiled modestly. "I just remember what it feels like to need someone to listen." At home, his mother continued to grow in her own way. She started taking classes at the local college, Not for a degree, but because she wanted to keep learning. Psychology, writing, public speaking, anything that helped her understand herself and others more deeply. Sometimes she would share what she learned at dinner, and they'd end up talking late into the night. Those talks became their new tradition. Then one day she surprised him again. "I'm thinking about writing a book," she said. His eyes widened. "A book about your story?" "About our story," she corrected gently. "Not just the pain, the recovery, the hope, the love that carried us through." He smiled. "I think people need that. You should do it." So she began to write. Every evening after dinner, she'd sit at her small desk with a cup of tea and her notebook. Some nights the words came easily. Other nights they came slowly, but she kept going. Months later, when she finished the first draft, she handed it to him. "Would you like to read it?" He spent 2 days reading, his heart full the entire time. When he was done, he looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's like our life on paper." She smiled, her eyes shining. "That's exactly what it is." The book eventually found its way into local libraries and community centers. It wasn't a bestseller or famous story, but it reached the people who needed it most. Letters started coming in, from readers thanking her for her honesty, for giving them hope. The boy, now a young man, often helped her reply to those letters. Together they wrote back to strangers who felt like friends. They reminded each one that healing was possible, that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered softly but changed everything. Years later, standing in the same garden where everything had begun to grow again, they reflected on their journey. The flowers around them were blooming, the air filled with the scent of earth and sunlight. The young man said quietly, "You know, that day in court feels like another lifetime." His mother nodded. "It does, but it's a part of who we are. That moment didn't just change me. It changed both of us." He looked at her with a small smile. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spoken that day?" She thought for a long moment. "No," she said finally, "because I believe you would have spoken eventually. The truth always finds its way out." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sky turn golden as the sun began to set. Then she turned to him, her voice soft. "You were my hero that day, and you still are." He smiled, looking down shyly, just like he did when he was little. "You're my hero too." In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of life, they both understood something important, that courage, love, and truth didn't just save them once. They were things they carried forever, things that would guide them no matter what came next. The little black boy who once stood trembling in a courtroom had grown into a young man with a calm strength in his heart. And his mother, once afraid of her own shadow, now stood tall and unshaken. Together, they had rewritten their story, not with anger or bitterness, but with grace, healing, and hope. And in that small sunlit garden, it was clear that their story would keep growing, just like the flowers they had planted with care and love.